This is Tonight. I'm Bruce Whitfield, and this year marks the 50th anniversary of Warren Buffett taking over at Berkshire Hathaway, an old-style textile company made into one of the biggest investment firms in the world. A regular attendee at the annual Omaha gathering, where Warren Buffett routinely addresses anything between 30 and 40,000 delegates. Some call them pilgrims. Well, one of those regulars is Walter Aylett. You've just come back, Walter Aylett.
Yes, I have. It was a great trip.
It's your 15th in a row. Now, you've got to tell me whether or not the story has changed over 15 years, because if Warren Buffett is true to being Warren Buffett, the philosophy surely is the same today as it was 15 years ago.
You've got it spot on. Nothing changes there. We go there just to reset the compass to true north and to clear the windscreen and to reinforce the behavior of the last year. The wonderful thing about Buffett is how consistent he is, and Charlie Munger, may I say. The two go together, and they joined at the hip, and the message never changes. It's always the same, and one is always surprised how they can be so consistent with all the questions that they get asked.
Is their performance as consistent as their answers?
I think so, and particularly in the last 5 to 10 years, they've been warning you of their performance sort of like decreasing as they get bigger and bigger. As you know, elephants don't gallop, and they're quite a big company now, but they still somehow surprise on the upside.
I mean, people talk about Warren Buffett in hushed tones, huge respect. He's the homely guy who's lived in the same house all of his life in Omaha, Nebraska. He drives a rubbish car, he eats junk food, he stuffs his face with Coca-Cola and sweets from the companies that he owns, simply to live the investment story that he breathes. Just give me a sense of the tone of this year's conference. 40,000 people, you were one of them. This is the biggest gathering ever.
Yeah, it just gets bigger and bigger every year, and it's actually got too big, in my opinion. The questions are still very, very good. I think what surprised me is how much energy the two had. You know, one would expect them to slow down a bit, but every year they seem to have more energy. You know, one has to remind oneself that Buffett's in his early 80s and Munger's in his early 90s. But I could swear 15 years ago and today, all that's changed is the number of people. They haven't changed. And I think the only thing that was new this year was how they emphasized rationality as a form of investing. In other words, doing rational things leads to good answers.
I mean, and again, they make it deceptively simple. If it was that simple, you wouldn't have felt the need to go 15 years in a row. What is the genius of Buffett and Munger and the investment plan that they've rolled out over half a century?
It's quite simple. A long, long time ago, when they were young people, they worked out their set of principles. They've stuck to them over the last 80 years. They work hard. That's something that never gets said. One doesn't realize how hard Buffett works. And they are consistent. They have these principles. They stick to them. They don't tell lies, therefore they don't have to remember any answers that they gave 10, 15 years. And that's their secret. They just stick. They do very little except think a lot and read a lot. And you know, the investment world and the academic world isn't comfortable with that. That doesn't sell books. They teach you how to invest in 6 hours. Academics can't make money out of that.
No, absolutely right. How does it affect you? Because value as a style of investing, certainly on the JSE in the last 5 years, hasn't delivered nearly the kinds of returns that 5 years ago we believed it would. In those days, shares were cheap. Nowadays, shares no longer so cheap, and value is distinctly out of favor.
Oh, it's very easy. You go there to re-emphasize that you try and do something that's rational. And there are many shares on the JSE, for example, that are not purchases today. So you avoid them. And you do suffer some short-term performance, but we've been there before. And I think what Buffett does for me is just kind of, you know, it's like we hold hands around the table at night on a Friday night just to make sure that we just don't break down and change our investment philosophy. And Buffett teaches that. And it reinforces your behavior and it gets easier.
And this is what's so astounding about the rules of investment. I mean, Buffett bases his philosophy on Benjamin Graham, who wrote shortly before the Wall Street crash of 1929. Those principles remain as true today as they did nearly 100 years ago. Why is it so hard in the 21st century for us to get those principles? Because a lot of people still chase growth. They will still throw money into NASPATs. They will still throw money into shares on insane multiples.
Because of human behavior. It's that simple. Humans have this problem of envy and of greed and of sometimes acting quite stupid or fearful. And Buffett has taught us through the writings of Benjamin Graham. And also, don't underestimate, Buffett has moved away from Graham, and he's a bit of a learning machine. He's never stopping to adapt or to change. And Fisher was a big influence on him in buying quality companies. Munger certainly influenced Buffett to a huge extent in looking for quality instead of these cheap cigar butt type stocks. And that's what Buffett is good at. The Fisher market theory, all these modern priests of financial theory, it doesn't suit them to teach you what Buffett and Munger talk about.
One looks at the philosophy, and they've avoided technology, IBM being the exception, and there seems to be some regret around that. But for example, Warren Buffett's missed out on Apple, the biggest company in the world. He was cautious of tech before the bubble burst in 2000, looked like a genius for a long time. Isn't that beginning to wear a bit thin as the global economy is changing so much to a tech focus where he still invests in Coke and railroads and that sort of stuff?
No, I think you've got it wrong, Bruce. He was very close to Intel and Microsoft 10, 15 years ago. He could have made money out of that. He could see how well they were doing. But the thing is, Buffett buys things that he can understand, and he has to try and imagine what the world looks like 10, 15 years out for those companies. And if you go to the AGM and you go down to the exhibition center, and you look at all the businesses that he has bought, they're boring old companies. They're predictables.
Yeah.
Brick companies, train companies. IBM, for me, the jury's still out. We own IBM, and I don't think he's made a mistake. He's bought a plumbing company.
Absolutely right. I mean, that's a good old-fashioned company, isn't it? Precisely in that. Yeah, but you say I'm wrong. Right. Just tell me where I'm going wrong in my understanding of where Buffett is positioning himself for his successors, assuming that he's not around in 10 or 15 years.
I'm talking about IBM.
Okay.
Okay. No, I don't think he's doing much wrong.
Well, he had, a return over 50 years of 2,850,000%. I mean, is there anybody else in the world who's delivered that kind of track record over any period?
Well, what's remarkable about that return is without leverage. I think people like Soros and Druckenmiller have done pretty well over the last 10 years, and there are a few other guys that have done well, but not in the manner in the way he did it.
And there's also, he faces...
And he's still doing it, by the way. He hasn't
Absolutely.
stopped.
He faces the same kind of questions as Brian Joffe faces. Brian Joffe, on a far smaller scale, has created a South African conglomerate in the services sector, investing in essentially boring businesses with growth potential. And Bidvesta's done okay out of that particular strategy. But Joffe faces the questions as, what happens when you go? Will they break it up? And there are some activist investors looking at Berkshire Hathaway. And one of the issues that did come up at this year's gathering was, what happens after you're gone? Do we see this thing split up and sold off? Is the sum of the parts not greater than the value of Berkshire Hathaway itself?
That's simply not going to happen. If you look at the shares, the way they're controlled by the Bill Gates Foundation over time. Bill Gates is not going to go against Warren Buffett. No, but if you look at the way they've been spun out of Buffett's holdings over the next 10 years, he's got roughly 35%. The board of directors are significant holders in the business. It's not going to happen in my lifetime.
But when one looks at the activist investors, there is pressure there. Is it just going to be noise that will be sort of fobbed off every year, as Warren Buffett tends to do?
Definitely over the next 5 to 10 years. I just don't think they've got the muscle.
And what
it's a big company. It's 350 million. You can do it with Apple, but I don't think you're going to do it with Berkshire.
Give me a sense of Warren Buffett. You say he's sprightly. You say Charlie Munger is sprightly. They can't go on forever. They had a succession plan about 5 or 6 years ago, which didn't work out. Do they have another plan in place?
Well, Bruce, we don't know what that succession plan was. We think we seem to think what it was, but we never knew who was the heir apparent. I think it's also an ever-changing story. I don't think Buffett is foolish enough to say, this is my man. People change over time, and things change, and I think it's a moving target.
I mean, you've been there 15 times. You'll probably go there for 16, 17, 18, 19 and 20. How has it influenced the way you manage your funds? Because you are a value investor. You take the philosophy to heart. How's it working out for you?
Look, Buffett says that if he was born in Bangladesh, he'd be someone's lunch. The USA rewards him in such a way that because he's wired for that market. We operate in a different market, but we do run offshore funds, and we're not trying to be like Buffett. I mean, Buffett has got a different certain circumstances. He works in a company. His cash flow is predictable. Our money can leave tomorrow. So we manage the money differently, but the principles are the same. We've been doing it for 20 years, and I don't see why we should change. It works.
How well does it work?
What's
your performance? What's your track record?
Well, since March 1999, it's somewhere between 12 and 15% per annum.
Yeah, and that compounded over time is a fairly significant growth rate. I mean,
you double your money every 5 years.
And that's got to be beating the S&P?
It is.
Okay, you don't need to be so shy about it, Walter. You don't need to be so shy about it.
Well, you know,
this is strong performance.
Is quite a funny thing, you know, depending when you measure it and when you start. And, you know, all I know is that we're doing pretty well. My kids are wealthy.
I'm sure they're grateful for it. Are they learning the investment principles? I mean, is it something that you're inculcating in them, Walter?
Well, I'll tell you a lovely story. On one of my visits back from Omaha, we decided to name our beagle Manga. And one day my little boy ran in and said, Dad, Manga's on TV. In other words, he heard the name Manga, but it was Charlie Manga. And they've been brought up with Berkshire. My eldest son has been to the AGM. And I hope that if they can pick up some of the good habits of life from Buffett and Manga, they'll do well. It is remarkable how he's influenced the Aylett family.
It is remarkable. Walter Aylett, thank you very much for joining us, the founding fund manager
Pleasure.
at Aylett Fund Managers, back from his 15th visit to Omaha, Nebraska, where he has hung on every single word spoken by Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger. Thank you for watching. There'll be more pearls of wisdom tomorrow night. Till then, good night and goodbye.